Hey crafty friends, my name is Martinette Horner and I am the happy face behind Happy Notes Crafts. Thank you for joining us on our YouTube hop this Saturday. I'm so excited to share a couple of fun folds with you. Hi friends, I have two fun folds to share with you. The first one is called a pop-out gatefold card. Now the actual card that I'm going to make for this video will have different paper, different patterns, but this is an example of what the finished product will look like. I wanted to show you before I get started what the mechanisms are and how it works and why it's called a fun fold card. So the first thing I wanted to share was that the gatefold refers to these two flaps here. That's the gate part. It opens up like a gate. And then the pop out part is this middle mechanism that we're gonna accomplish with some score lines, okay? So I've already scored and cut one to go ahead and get started, but I wanted to show you and give you some tips and pointers about how to do this and what this will look like. So we're gonna start out with a piece of cardstock that measures 8 inches by 5.5 inches, okay? Now, while we are on the long side, so the 8-inch side, we're gonna score at 2 inches and then again at 6 inches. At that point, I'm gonna turn the cardstock to the short side and I want to line up the first edge at 1.25 inches. And this time I'm going to cut between those two score lines that I just made. So I'm gonna enlarge this just a little bit or zoom in a little bit. Hopefully you'll be able to see those score lines. It's hard to fit both of them into the camera's view, but when you make those score lines, you'll be able to see where the top one is at 2 inches and then the bottom one at 6 inches. I'm gonna make my cut line just between those two score lines. So using my cutter, the guide on my cutter, I am going to align the cutter, the little divot in there, right there at the 2-inch mark. I have my side ruler that can help me in the paper trimmer, and I'm gonna cut down to 6 inches and stop, okay? Now I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side, but instead of flipping the paper around, I'm gonna use the ruler on my paper trimmer because I can get to 1 1/4 on this side of the cutting tray. So I know that when I cross this cutting tray here, I'm building up to 1 inch and a little bit more going to the right hand side of the trimmer. So all I need to do is now slide to 1 1/4 inches on this side of the paper trimmer and then do the same thing. So I'm gonna put my marker at 2 and score down to 6, okay? And now I have 2 cuts between those 2 lines. Zoom back out a little bit so we can keep going here, okay? Now, we're gonna go back to our long side and we're gonna score at 3 inches between those 2 cut lines, okay? So we're simply turning the card base around to the long side, okay? And we are going to score at 3 inches. So I'm gonna put my edge here at 3, and I'm gonna move my cutter blade out of the way. This is when it gets tricky. You wanna make sure you remember which one cuts and which one should score. And I'm gonna score at 3 inches, but between the 2 cut lines that I just made. So I'm gonna go back, put my score blade at the beginning of that cut line, which was 1 1/4, remember? So I can measure that from my side ruler here. That's at 1 1/4, and I'm gonna score down to the second cut line, okay? I'm gonna do the same thing on the opposite side, but this time I am gonna flip it around, and I'm gonna get the edge at 3 again, and I'm gonna score between those 2 cut lines again. So starting at 1 1/4 and down, okay? So you probably can see the mechanism starting to take shape here, all right? The next thing I'm gonna do, let's see. The next thing I need to do is to put in sort of the middle mechanism here. So I'm gonna go to 4 inches on the long side, and I am gonna score 4 inches all the way down. So 4 inches, actually not all the way down, but from the top down to the first score line, that's at 4 inches. I'm gonna come down to the bottom and score up to that score line, to that first cut line from the bottom at 4 inches. Now you might be able to see everything starting to come together, okay? All right, at this point in time, I think we have all of our lines scored, everything is in place. So I'm gonna go ahead and start putting this together with my decorations, okay? So now when you have your score lines in, you might want to use your bone folder to give those lines a crease, okay? And of course, with the ones that don't score all the way down the middle of the paper, you want to just crease ever so slightly. Give a good crease to those without scoring where you're not meant to. And there we have it, okay? So let's start decorating. I've already pre-cut some of my layers here to save us a little bit of time. And my first layer, I'm gonna be using this berry burst. These are my long strips that are gonna measure 5 1/4 by 1 3/4 of an inch, okay? And my designer series paper measures 5 inches by 1 1/2. So we'll have a nice little frame around the strip of designer series paper. Now for this particular pattern, you do want to make sure that your, it actually doesn't matter as much because I cut a small piece out of it, but there is a pretty detectable orientation for where or which direction the stems are going on the flowers. So you just want to make sure that depending on how you cut your pattern, your flowers aren't upside down, if that makes sense, okay? So once again, the measurements for these, the cardstock itself measures 5 1/4 by 1 3/4 inches. And then the designer series paper that I'm sort of layering on top measures 5 inches by 1 1/2. So just want to repeat that for you. Okay. And I am going to place both of these strips on the outside. These are going to be the first thing you see for the gatefold. Now, do you see how that color, that lemon lime twist just popped as soon as I put that berry burst with the designer series paper? It just popped. I love these bright, vivid colors. Now I'm going to close this up so that I can have these sort of evenly adhered to the front flaps. Okay. All right. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with you is something that I am going to do with my dies. There's not a lot of stamping with this particular card. I am using the Paper Florist dies, which are on page 165 of the annual catalog. Now, what's cool about these dies is they are very efficient. So there's one large die that cuts out 4 separate flowers, okay? And I'll just use at least 2 of them. I'm gonna put a little bit of glue. Actually, I'm gonna do my little crinkling first. So if you go back to this designer series paper, this paper looks like it's crumpled and crinkled. So I wanted to have that same effect with my flowers as well. And to do that, I'm just kind of smushing the little petals in a back and forth fan motion almost. You need to be careful that you don't rip the petals, but I do want to distress my flowers a little bit. Definitely want to distress them. Okay. And I always like to have 2 layers to my flowers, so I'm going to do that same thing to the second layer. Just crumpling it up, being careful not to rip off the petals. Okay. And I'm going to carefully open the flowers. This is where it gets a little bit dicey because I've broken down the fibers in that paper. So I want to make sure that I don't rip the petals off. So be very careful when you're unfolding these. But I'm getting a similar effect of distressed paper as the designer series paper suggests. It's almost like the paper was torn to make the flowers. Well, instead of tearing these, I'm just crumbling them up. I can crumple this one a little bit more probably. Okay, I purposefully want that crumpled look. Okay, and now I am going to, again, open these carefully, and I want to put just a little spot of glue in the middle to connect these. All right, and to sort of have the petals interleaf with one another. So I don't want to stack them one on top of the other. They'll just kind of leaf in between the other. Okay, the other petals. All right, so I think that's enough crumpling and distressing. And now I can just add a little bit of literally a spot of adhesive here. So I don't want to make a mess. And let's glue these 2 together. Starts to come together really nicely when you put both of them together. Now I need something to kind of make them stick because I've crumbled it. My little spot of glue may not want to hold everything together. I've also cut some centers. So again, these are paired up. I think I'll use the smaller one. I'm using just a tiny piece of paper from the Brights stack. 6x6 designer series paper, also in the annual catalog. And I'm using this because first of all, I like the texture, but most importantly, that lemon lime twist is my main color here, right? That's my coordinating color. All right, I have also cut some circles from the Stylish Shape dies. I have one in Lost Lagoon. I have one in Berry Burst, and I've cut circles from, or punched circles from the 2 3/8 inch punch as well. It nests beautifully with this Stylish Shape circle. This is the second from the largest shape, and this is the 2 3/8 circle punch. The 2 3/8 circle punch is found on page 147 in the catalog. I am going to actually use some dimensionals to pop up the circle for this one. I want just a little bit of height. I don't want to get too carried away because I definitely want this to fit in the envelope. So I'm going to be very careful about all the dimensionals because I usually load up my layers and things with dimensionals. So I'm going to be very careful with that. Okay. All right. And you can pop this one right here in the middle. And I'll make another one, just one more, because I don't think you can have too many flowers on this one. Okay, so just like the other, the bigger flower, I'm going to crumple, 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 crumple. And I am going to very carefully open up these petals after I've distressed them, and we should be good to go. Do the same thing. I usually design in threes, so in other words, I would technically have 3 flowers, but I think I can make this work with just 2. Maybe I'll add an embellishment for the 3rd item. Using groups of 3 helps with the designer's eye as well as the viewer. It's a design principle to kind of go with odd numbers, and for me, especially with any of these types of elements or embellishments, I like groups of 3. Okay, all right, got a little bit of too much glue there, and I guess on this one I'm going to use the larger circle or center. This one came in a die with 2 circles or centers in it, and both of them cut one separately, but I cut them both at the same time. So again, the paper florist dies are quite efficient, very efficient. You can get a lot cut with just a couple of rolls or 1 roll. Okay, all right. Now we can start finishing things up here. I am going to stamp a sentiment. I'm actually using a sentiment from the Lighting the Way set. I just pulled this one. I thought it was appropriate and I liked it for the card. I'm using You Are All Kinds of Wonderful. This is a special card. I use my fun folds for very special occasions and for folks that I know will actually appreciate the card and the complexity of it. Okay, I know these cards won't end up in the trash can, or at least not right away. All right, you hope that they'll hold on to them, but I understand. So very special folks will get this particular kind of card because of the complexity of it. It's actually not too hard to make, but we have all these score lines and these different very different cuts and the pop out mechanisms. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Make sure that someone special gets this. I have lots of August birthdays in my family and friendship circles, so this will not go to waste. All right, I decided to pop that up. And then I have 4 little pieces here that are gonna sort of tie in all of these colors. These little pieces, let me look at my cheat sheet here. They measure 1 3/4 of an inch by 1. So again, real small, but they just kind of add a little pop of color in here. And we're gonna put these on the panels at the top and the matching panels at the bottom. Lots of lemon lime twist here. Lots of lemon lime twist. Okay. And you can, decide to flip that across the desk. You can decide to continue to decorate these inner gatefolds on the inside, but I'm actually going to use those for spaces to write a message and sign my card. Okay, so I don't want to totally cover up that space. I suppose you could write on the back too, but I think that's an odd looking place to write. So I'm gonna save these inside panels for the writing, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. I think that's it with my panel, my little panels. And to close that all together, I want to make sure that when I attach the circle that I don't totally adhere the card shut. So I only want a little bit of glue on one little portion. And as a matter of fact, to help me remember that, I can just attach the glue or put the glue on this panel so that I won't mess up and glue it shut. I have to be careful with that, okay? All right. And of course, gotta have a little bling there. It's no fun without some type of bling, is it? So let's see what I have in my stash. I have some adhesive backed sequins trio in 3 colors. And of course, I'm gonna pull out a couple of those pink. And using my Take Your Pick tool, to help me literally pick them up, I will add them, oops, here. Let's get a bigger one for here. I'm just filling in some of that white space, if that makes sense. And oh, I lost that one. Let me, oh, here it is on my computer key. Just kind of flipped by me. Okay. And maybe one here. There we go. I'll continue the same on the inside where the message is. Put one here. And let's do a bigger one here on both sides. There we go. All right, I hope you enjoyed this first fun fold for me. Pop out gatefold card. Enjoy.